So today I'm going to talk about some innovative fencing technologies, and so there is no sci-fi solution that we can just use to solve all our problems. So a lot of it still we got to put in the work, and some of that work is going to be for the mapping, planning, and then monitoring our fence lines. So some of this we can put in ahead of time and then really see a benefit for our planning purposes and when we're going to purchase our materials. So like I said, I'm going to talk about the current technologies that we have for mapping, monitoring, and tracking, and then potentially the future for some virtual fencing. And so for online measurement tools, there's a couple options that are available. So some of them being that are freely available. So I'd initially go to Google Maps is a good resource. Kentucky Base Map is another one that's been very popular with a lot of producers, even myself. And the AgSite assessment tool, if I'm looking at, so University of Missouri Extension has that. It's available to get some good general resources on what's available on the farm. So, for Google Maps, when we're using that as a tool, easiest way we can do, so a lot of times we do site visits or farm visits. For us, you may know your property intimately, but for us to know that location, there may not be an address available for us to get there easily. So as we're extension producers and specialists, a lot of times if we right-click, and there's a lot of options available, if we click what's here, it gives us latitude and longitude. And then the option to share that with extension specialists and the agents so we know exactly where to go to on the farm. If there's a barn or something that needs to be redone or evaluated or handling facility, that's really helpful for us to at least know exactly where to go when we're trying to do a farm visit. So we're not going to like, oh, go past the red barn and see this. It's a lot more helpful for us to get the exact location to know where we're going to. So that can be helpful for us when we're using Google Maps and can share that information. Also what's available, if we right-click again, so we right-click, it also gives us measure distance. And so then we can click around our boundary and get a distance as far as how much feet we're going to be putting in for a fence line. So how much fence line? This is about, up to this point, about 2,500 foot of fence. And so it can really help us estimate how many posts do we need, how many potentially gates do we need to have as well. But if we completely enclose it, it actually does give us a total area. So it gives you a total area in square feet or square meters. So then you can convert that to potentially, this is about 10.5 acres or so. So then you can convert that if needed. So Google Earth is one of those quick, easy, free, go-to solutions for it. And if you click off of it, the one limitation is if you click off of it, we lose that square footage measurement. So that's just, we can do pretty much one field at a time. Can't necessarily do multiple fields. That is one limitation of Google Earth.
Can you go over that one more time?
All right.
Click on it twice.
So we right-clicked. Well, you really just need to click on it once. So once I was showing you get for what's here, if I'm trying to send the latitude and longitude of where my facility is to an agent or specialist. The other option is if you right-click, so that's selecting for what here. You can also select measure distance. And so that's where you can get your perimeter for your fields. And so they'll be fairly accurate. It might be off by 20, 40 feet. A couple pipes if you're looking at water line, a couple 20-foot pipes. But it gets you a really good estimation of how much fence am I particularly looking at, water line, whatever it may be. Gives you a general estimation of what you could expect. And if you go completely enclose the area, it does give you that area. So you completely enclose it, select back on your first point, click back on your first point, it gives you area. But as soon as you click off, you've lost it. So, the pros of Google Maps is it's quick and easy. Quick, easy, free. You can get location and use, but we can't save the data. We do lose area. We can't really measure more than one field at a time. So that takes us to Kentucky Base Maps. Kentucky Base Maps is another good resource. So Kentucky Base Map, I've heard it called Kentucky Commonwealth Map. I forget there's one other name for it as well, but this is another good resource. So with this one, we can right-click on our locations. We can select our field. So we select for the polygon-looking shape. So it'd be this shape here. So select for that polygon shape. We can select for different colors. We can select for show measurements as well. So we can select for acres. We can select for different units, acres, and have that specified as feet as well. But with this, we do the same thing. We draw our shape around our area, and it's able to give us, how many acres. This is about 24 and about 4,000 foot of fence potentially. And so it's another good resource, and we can do, the nice thing about it is we can change the colors over here and then add another field. So this is really good if I'm trying to figure out how much fertilizer to apply or how much fertilizer to buy for the spring. I kind of get all these drawn out, printed out a map, and I just have a general resource. I can quickly and easily look and see, all right, that field's about 24 acres. I need to put down so much my rate. It helps as a good planning tool for a lot of producers, just a general, freely available planning tool for producers. So again, we can create different shapes and colors. We can measure area and distance. However, we can't necessarily save, we can't export shape files or KML files. So there's that somewhat a limitation there. So we also have, another one is the AgSite assessment tool. So it's another freely available online tool as well. I do like this one, so it gives you a lot more data. So area, centroid, hydraulic summaries, hydraulic conductivity summaries, soil, productivity, environmental. It gives you lots of data. So there's representation. There is some, I do like the fact that it gives you just an overall soil profile of the property that you're looking at. So if I was thinking about looking at a neighbor's property or potential expansion, this would probably be a tool I'd utilize just to get a general idea of what would they have. You know, think about conquests in the future. And so it does also give you a 30-year preset and some other information as well. They do provide a windrow, so you can select for different months of the year potentially, and also I think it is limited by, instead of being 30 years, I think it's only 15 years. So if you're looking at it from an engineering standpoint, it might have some data but not a complete summary. But you can do it. You can draw, similarly to the other tools, you can draw an overall boundary, and it'll provide you with some centroids and other measurements. We can measure. So in this case, there's a line going across here, and it does give you a rough estimation of elevation. So a lot of these elevations, when they're done, they're either 10 meter, 3 meter, and some of them are fairly detailed, but most of them are going to be just generalizations of what you could expect to see as far as, so if I'm putting a fence line across this area, this would be the potential elevation challenge I would be encountering. So this can be a good tool for like, okay, well, if we have this, or if I'm putting in waterers, okay, so my elevation is at least that much meters of distance. So I know there's going to be a certain pressure head I have to plan for and account for. So this can be a good general tool for getting an idea of what's taking place on this property.
Josh, when it gives you the distance there, is that straight line distance or is that elevation?
It should be elevation distance, but it's going to be a little bit, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect. So we're going to be fairly accurate somewhat in XY, but anytime we add a Z element, that's when we see a lot of our inaccuracies being added. Anytime we see a lot of the elevation profile. So we can do really good for X and Y, but when we get to Z, that's when there's the general measurements is going to be a little more variable. And so again, we get area, square miles, feet, acres, whatever we want to specify, we can get area as well. So again, the AgSite assessment tools provides a lot of data, but we can take measurements, distance, feet, but we can't necessarily save that information. So it's good, just a general evaluation of maybe your neighbor's property or see what's going on around you in your area. Now the one I do prefer, so we have those options, quick, easy way to evaluate some fields. I do like Google Earth Pro. It's free to download. I like the download version. There is an online version. It's just not as nice. It doesn't function as well. So I wouldn't use that one as much per se. But it is, the online version is just not as useful. Okay, so we have two main file types. So KML, KMZ. I usually save everything in KMZ because it's just a little more information. If I want to add images, I can easily add images as well. So I usually save in Z, but you can always save it just as that, just due to versatility. And you have a couple different types of data. So this one is showing a breakdown of some fields up in Boyle County. So different pastures, different fence lines. The dark blue lines are waterers. So if I'm sending this to my county agent, I'm sending it to a specialist, this is my field breakdown. This is a proposed field breakdown. This is the location. And usually it's limited by each one of these pins here are points, and they're just the location of a waterer in this case. So showing how this is my field breakdown, this is my potential rotation schedule, does this work? And so this is something we're thinking about, as we're getting these, we have our boundary fence, what Clint talks about. We have to have our boundary, but within that, what's our options for rotational grazing, trying to prolong our forages. So this is a good option that's we can utilize and then share that with our agents, share it with our specialists. And so using points, lines, and polygons if you want to have the whole entire field shown. So with this, it's good from a data management standpoint. The fact that we can merge some of those different shape files, or merge those different files together. So if I have an outline for this field, and this field, all in the same property, I can put them into the same folder, organize them into the same folder. If I have different farms, I can add information to these as needed. So this can be a very, very nice tool, or if I wanted to email it to that agent, I just have to click on that, right-click on the folder, and then I click on email. And I can email those KML, KMZ files to my county agent or specialist. So I can share, this is what I have, and they can easily view it. So it's a fairly versatile tool if I want to save and share this information.
Is that saved on your hard drive?
I think it's saved on your hard drive. Yeah, it's not going to be on your, because you've downloaded it, the downloaded version, it's usually saved on your hard drive. But once you have it in your email, then it's on your email. You can, if you lost that computer, you can still pull it from your email, potentially. So you would have that as an option. And you can add information to it. So you can add all kinds of information to it. In this case, we just added some acres, field name, ID, limestone, whatever we needed to add there. You can add first cutting hay, hay yield, second cutting hay yields. Whatever you need to add, you can add the information there. And it automatically has, if you have it as a polygon, has the number of acres as well. So you have that information readily available to you if you put it in there. And like I said, on some of those you can add a picture. So in this case, there's a Ritchie water right there, so we're working on that in the wintertime. But if you want to add information, that can be helpful. And it's good to have this because a lot of farms, in my mind, especially for the water lines, are going through that transition. So they're shifting from the older generation to the new. And so while the old generation may know where all the challenges and water lines are, the new one may not. And so it might be helpful to at least have some sort of representation of, here's where I'm pretty sure the water line is. And so sometimes you can walk down, there's different apps, but you can walk down your fence line and record that, or walk down where you think the water line is, and potentially record that and then upload it onto your Google Earth files. So for monitoring, so that was for mapping. So that's what our tools as far as mapping. So we had, really trying to use our Google Earth Pro, but there's other online options available. So for monitoring, when I was growing up, the blade of grass was how we did our monitoring. Or worst case scenario, touched it, which wasn't ideal. So, but it definitely told you if the livestock were going to respect the fence or not. But there are lots of tools that are available. So we have these where we can monitor our voltage, monitor where our current flow is, and monitor for faults, our fault finder. And then Jeremy and them, they have these systems now where he can probably tell you what his voltage is at his home farm right now just looking at his cell phone. So they do have online options. They have apps for that, and it's going to be a little more investment, but something you could also think about. Like, I really want to monitor my fence lines. That would be how I could go about it. And then they have the old school light version as well. If you want to have the fence goes down, a light comes on. So there's lots of different options. Just you have to utilize one of them because if you're going to have livestock, you got to make sure it's hot. So if there is an issue, you definitely want to know about it. So they're going to be extremely aggressive poker players. You just got to, they will call your bluff every time. Make sure it is hot. So, and then as far as exploring options for monitoring, there are options. I really like utilizing drones. And so they can be a quick, easy tool. This one here flies about 35 miles an hour, weighs next to nothing. I can almost put it in my pocket. And they have options where it's this size and can fly for about 50 minutes. And I can set up dedicated flight paths around my fence line. And they can be neat tools for utilizing with livestock. This is just a DJI Mini 2. I think they're up to Mini 3 now at this point. But this one's about $400 investment, and it's actually, I think you can get CAPE money with it as well, because it is one of those new technologies within agriculture. So you can get CAPE money for 50% off. I think you have to get your UAS license with it. You have to get your UAS license as part of the CAPE funding as well. But you need to get your unmanned aerial vehicle license, so you have to be, this drone is registered with the FAA. It's $5, and then you have to take a knowledge test, which is $175, good for 2 years, but every test after that is free. So it's like, in my mind, it's more of a permit test. It just tells you the rules of the sky, but there's apps for that. So like the letter B, number 4, letter U, and Fly app is a good one for just figuring out what airspace. So you guys around here might have military bases. Yeah, don't fly there. This is a Chinese drone, so they get kind of funny about that kind of stuff. They got really mad about the balloon, but everybody has a Chinese drone. So, this is, and anytime you have a towered airport, usually if it's a non-towered airport, it doesn't really have as much restrictions, but it's a towered airport, they get a lot more restrictive as far as having, the radius is probably 5 nautical miles around that airport. But, we can use these. They can be quick, easy devices. So like I said, this will fly up to 35 to 45 miles an hour, depending on the mode I'm in. And so you can check your waters, check your feed, check your cattle. It's a quick, easy way to get just a general idea of where they are, assuming they're not in the trees, of what's going on within your pasture and fence line. And so a lot of times I suggest, anytime there's wind damage or high wind events, there is, Clinton was talking about, there's trees all along usually the fence lines. And so just monitoring your fence lines after a major storm event to make sure none of the animals are getting out, because that can be a concern for a lot of producers. So, look, when the trees do go down, what kind of challenge do we expect right after these big major storm events or even after a big snowstorm? What's still up, what's not? And really, a lot of times, a lot of producers, for them, they rationalize it. They're trying to avoid opening a lot of gates, really. So you fly this as a crow flies. You can fly up to 400 feet above ground level, fly to where you need to be, and then drop back down. So as long as you maintain visual line of sight, which, sometimes is a lie we tell ourselves. It's like, oh, yeah, I can see it perfectly way out there, half a mile away. This has, well, that's the funny thing. So it'll have a range of probably half a mile. Like, you can still see this half a mile away. It's got lights on it, but how what? Oh, it doesn't? And so do you have a hill in between? So sometimes if you lose that, if there's an obstacle in between, you can lose that line of sight. You could, if you have beyond visual line of sight, the way you could get around that is sometimes there's apps called, so it depends on what kind of phone you have, but there's ones like Drone Harmony for Android and DJI Ground Station Pro, which you set up a flight path, and it should pretty much upload into here, then operate in an autonomous fashion around, if you want to set up for a boundary fence line monitoring. So it'd be Ground Station Pro or Drone Harmony potentially. So it's loading that flight plan in here, and so you have to specify what happens when it loses signal. Does it keep going, or does it stop and return to home? So sometimes it's a setting in there. You have the flight plan versus what's the default setting, essentially. You change that default from return to home when you lose signal as opposed to keep on the mission. It's probably one way you can get around that. Potentially. Which one, what type do you have? Maybe we'll talk after. It won't, the range isn't long enough. There's other ones you can get. The old Phantom 4s might go about, I guess if you're going about half a mile, the Phantom 4s could go about a mile away. And there's still not far enough? All right, well, you can get fixed wing, potentially. And they have, we'll talk a little bit after. So we can specify really exactly what you need as far as distance. This is one of the other, it's hard to think about it that, mud will be something that will be a problem here in about 2 or 3 months. And it could be, whenever decides to let loose, this is usually a problem for the wintertime. I don't know how, I keep talking to our weatherman, is El Nino going to be drought, or is El Nino going to still bring all this rain? He says it depends every time. So it's always a challenge to get a straight answer from him. But this will be a challenge, and so sometimes you can send your drone out there, you can monitor hay rings, and not have to get out there in the mud. A lot of these issues here can be solved by some just NRCS and other types of projects. So maybe a feeding pad or a fence line feeder. So some of the challenges here can be solved by other means. But if we're trying to, if that's what we have, we can definitely use a drone to go out there and monitor how much hay do we have in our rings, and not have to actually trudge through that same mud the cattle going through, or tear up our fields even more with that vehicle. As far as speed, so this one, it's 35 to 45-ish, depending on which mode. But you can go from the front of the farm to back of 72 acres within a minute. So at 400 feet as a crow flies can really save you some time. You're flying at 400 feet above ground level, the cows will look like ants, and you can have it set to drop down and look at the animals so we can maintain our signal. For drone harmony, we can set it up where we can fly the fence line. Each one of these black dots or the black triangles represent the angle of our camera. So the altitude and the angle of our camera, we can set up either remotely monitor this fence line and take pictures or record video. So either way, we could have it monitor our fence lines. So when we have stuff like Clint was talking about, if cattle do get out, we could at least show some, because the flight path is being recorded every time, show due diligence in checking our fence lines, essentially. And we'd have some video showing, oh, it was good this day. So we could really build a case for ourselves if we had to, of this is our fence lines, this is the quality, we're monitoring, we're showing due diligence as far as monitoring our fence lines. And there's all kinds of, if you want different settings, we have different settings as well. And flight path and obviously your camera angles is being shown by this here. So if we have a camera angle along our fence lines. And so that's some of the current stuff we have, and they actually have, this is coming out especially towards the western US, but virtual fencing. So virtual fencing is becoming more and more popular. However, it can't be used as of yet for, it is not a legal boundary fence. We cannot use it as a boundary fence. We can't say, I'll just use this instead because we want something that works all the time. We need a resilient fence along our boundary. So for the legal fence, we can't use this. But as far as interior fencing or rotational options, this could be something that we'd have, there'd be a monthly fee, and then I think initial cost with it. But the cow pretty much wears a collar, and that collar helps guide the cows to staying within a certain area. So you have the GPS location, we have a base station communicating with this, and then we're able to set it up through an app of what areas can the cow graze. So a lot of this is being used primarily or currently out west, where they have the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM grounds, and the forest. We want to use that out west for rotating the cattle, making sure they stay out of our sensitive areas potentially. And
Does it give a noise or a shock?
it gives them a noise deterrent and then a shock as far as I can understand. So it's.
So we had, Jeremy actually arranged it several years ago. We had Heart of America Grazing Conference. Jeremy got, I can't remember who it was from New Zealand to come over and talk about British Shepherd collars. And there's a fascinating video in that presentation on how they train the animals with these collars. It's really a kind of a neat technology.
So the animals can kind of challenge and cheat the system. So sometimes it depends on how much they want to go somewhere and how much motivation they have. Because it's like any other system. Our fence has to work 24/7. They got 24/7 to figure out how to get around it. So, but let's see. And then we have some other options. We are trying to use some, got my Terminator music. But just as an option, we're doing some facial recognition work where we've been able to, within a day, we get about 90% accuracy. Between days, it could go from 90 to down to 10%. Just really depends on the light levels. And we're doing our primary work with Angus, but this is an example of one of these things is not like the other. And so we're trying to identify what the actual animal features are different as opposed to the spots on the animal. So we use primarily Angus as opposed to dairy cows. But with that, I guess one of the things I want to say is one of the technologies, so I mentioned the drone, but something I've grown to really, really like is a fencing stapler. So whether, if you're old, I always say, or older, I would say life is too short, just buy a stapler because it makes it so much faster. If you're younger, you got a whole bunch of farming ahead of you, buy a stapler. So it really helps. Your staples are going to be about 8 cents a piece as opposed to 4 cents a piece, but I've pretty much quit almost using a hammer at this point. And each one, so they're all kind of funny, so everybody has their own little DeWalt has on, there's different companies, but each one has their own specialized staplers, or staples. So that's where Clint was making fun of, he was giving me some grief about I call them steeples, and he's like, oh, they're staples. Like, I know they're staples, but everybody around where I'm from calls them steeples. And so he was just giving me some grief on the video there. But yeah, they're going to be fairly easy. They're about 8 cents a piece as opposed to 4 cents a piece. So if you get them You know, with your hammer, they're going to be about 4 cents a pop. These are 8 cents, but it's so much faster because I can pretty much walk along a fence line. As fast as I can count, I can put steeples in. So they have different power level settings, different modes for if you want to put in one steeple or a bunch of staples. It goes however you want to say it, however your preference is. But I think it's going to be a very, very useful tool. They are an investment, but I think if you're going to do a fair amount of fencing, it's definitely worth it because it'll save you. My forearms aren't as big as they used to be because I got this and said, oh, this will get one battery, give me about 300 foot of fence. So it's definitely a very, very beneficial tool, and I think I'm out of time, aren't I? Yep.
And it's perfectly, John.